He walked into the room and I froze mid-stretch. My arms were above my head, my back arched slightly, the hem of my tank top riding up just enough to reveal the soft curve of my waist. I wasn't expecting him, and by the look on his face, he wasn't expecting me either. For a long moment, neither of us moved. His silence was deafening, the weight of his gaze lingering on me before he quickly looked away. Sorry, he muttered, clearing his throat. I didn't mean to interrupt. It's fine, I said quickly, too quickly as I dropped my arms and adjusted my shirt. My face felt warm, but I couldn't tell if it was embarrassment or something else entirely. Ryan turned, mumbling something about needing to check the gutters and a sapper down the hall before I could see another word, but his silence stayed with me. I hadn't expected him to be hereditary. My stepson's visits were sporadic and gestures wrapped in practicality after the divorce. I assumed he'd never see him again, but Ryan surprised me by showing up one afternoon with a toolbox in hand, offering to help with repairs around the house. It's the least I can do, he said. That was 6 months ago. At first, I thought he came out of obligation, a sense of duty left over from his childhood. I married his father, Simon, when Ryan was just 16, and though our relationship was never especially close, it was never strained either. Polite, cordial, mutual respectful, and the way two people circling each other's orbits tend to bub you. Simon and I had fallen apart. His betrayal wasn't explosive, just insidious, a gradual pulling away, a series of missed glances and ignored moments culminating in his departure with a younger, brighter woman. It wasn't the age difference that stung so much as the fact that I hadn't seen it coming, or maybe I had, and I just didn't want to admit it. In the aftermath, I threw myself into routines, mornings with black coffee and sunrise. I hardly noticed afternoons spent rearranging furniture I didn't even like, and evenings with yoga mats spread across the sunroom floor trying to stretch away the tightness in my chest. Ryan's visits disrupted the monotony in ways I hadn't expected. He fixed the wobbly porch railing, patched the hole in the bedroom wall, and replaced the burnt-out bulbs in the hallway. But it wasn't just his work that lingered, it was his presence that morning after he walked out of the sunroom. I tried to focus on misstretches, but the rhythm was gone. Miming kept replaying the way he'd looked at me, not inappropriately, but not indifferently either. There was something about Ryan I hadn't noticed before. Maybe it was the way his shoulders had broadened since I first met him, or the confidence he carried now at 25. He wasn't a teenager anymore, he was a man. I shook my head, forcing the thought away. This was ridiculous. Ryan was just banking helping me out because his father wouldn't. There was nothing more to it. Still later that afternoon, as I folded laundry and watched the rain patter against the windows, I found myself glancing toward the front door, wondering if he'd be back soon. I told myself it was because the gutters really did need fixing. The rain had stopped by the time Ryan came back inside. He'd been on the ladder for nearly an hour, clearing leaves from the gutters and brushing dirt from the shingles, his sweatshirt damp and clinging to his arms. I glanced up from the kitchen counter where I was chopping vegetables for dinner, trying to keep my voice casual. Get everything sorted out up there, he nodded, wiping his shins on his jeans. Yeah, though you might want to think about trimming that tree out back. The branches are what's clogging everything up. I smiled faintly. I'll add it to the list. Ryan raised an eyebrow, leaning against the doorway. This infamous list of yours is getting out offhand. When's the last time you just let something be? I paused, the knife hovering over the cutting board. It was such a simple question, but it hit harder than I expected. Letting things be wasn't my strong suit. Probably never, I admitted, forcing a laugh. Ryan tilted his head, studying me for a moment. You don't have it to do everything alone, you know. I shrugged, trying to downplay the weight of his words. Old habits die hard. I guess didn't reply, but there was something in his gaze, something steady, almost searching, that made my pulse quicken. I broke the moment by returning to my task, focusing on the rhythmic chop of the knife against the wooden board. Ryan stayed for dinner, as he often did these days. It wasn't planned. He just linger until the sun dipped low, and I'd insist joined. And me, cooking for one had always felt lonely, but cooking for two made the house feel just a little warmer. That night we ate at the small table in the kitchen. The dining room had always felt too formal, too full of ghost. This is good, Ryan said, nodding toward his plate. Just pasta, I replied, though I couldn't help but feel pleased to be the compliment. It's better than I make, he said, grinning. Pretty sure my idea of cooking is dumping hot sauce on whatever's in the fridge. I laughed, a genuine sound that felt foreign in my ears. Well, you're welcome to dinner in a time, as long as you promise not to ruin it with hot sauce, deal, he said, his grin softening into a smile that lingered just a second too long. The silence that followed wasn't comfortable, but it was charged. I could feel his eyes on me as I sipped my winning. When I finally looked up, the intensity of his gaze made my breath itch. What, I asked, my voice quieter than he intended. He shook his head, smile fading. Nothing, just it's nice to see You like this, like what? Relax, he said, simply wanted to tell him I wasn't relaxed at that. I was anything but the words stuck in my throat instead. I forced Asmal's smile and reached for my glass again. The next day, Ryan showed up with a toolbox and an air of determination. What's all this? I said, watching as he hauled the heavy cassento the living room. Your infamous list, replied, pulling out a wrench. Figured he'd make a dent in it. I couldn't help but laugh, shaking my head. You don't have it, do? That I want to, he said Histon, leaving no room for argument for the next few hours. I watched as he moved through the house with a kind of quiet efficiency. He tightened loose cabinet handles, fixed a leaky faucet, and even replaced the batteries in the smoke detectors. At one point, he asked me to hold a flashlight while he worked on the ceiling fan in the guest room standing beneath him. I couldn't help but notice that the way his shirt stretched across his back, the muscles in his arms flexing. Ash adjusted the screws. You've gotten good at this, I said, my voice coming out softer than I intended. Ryan glanced down at me, his smile lopsided. What, fixing things, taking care of people? I said before I could stop myself for a moment. Just looked at me, his expression unreadable. Then he shrugged, returning to his work. I learned from the best. The comment caught me off guard, and I felt a lump rise in my throat. I busied myself adjusting the flashlight, but the words stayed with me long after had finished. A week later, Ryan invited him out to dinner. You've been cooped up too long, he said when I hesitated. Coming in, it'll be good for you, my treat. He wanted to say no, to come up with some excuse to stay home where it was safe, but the way he looked at Emmy Ernestipple made it impossible to refuse. The restaurant he chose was small and cozy, tucked away on a quiet street I hadn't been to in years, the kind of place Simon would have dismissed as too quaint. This is nice, I said as we sat down. The soft glow of the candlelight casting shadows across the table. I thought you'd like it. Ryan replied, his smile easy. Over the course of the meal, the conversation flowed effortlessly. We talked about everything and nothing, his work, my hobbies, the latest book I'd read. But as the wine flowed and the plates were cleared, the topics grew heavier. I've been meaning toast, Ryan said, his voice quieter now. How are you holding up, really? I hesitated, the question cutting through the easy atmosphere we built. I'm fine, I said reflexively. Ryan frowned. You didn't have to say that, not to me. His sincerity was disarming, and I felt my defenses crumbling. It's hard. I admit some days are better than others, but mostly I just feel stuck. Ryan nodded, his expression thoughtful. You don't have to stay stuck. You know you deserve more. Ethan, his words lingered heavy and unresolved as we left the restaurant and drove home in mere silence. When Hugh walked me to the door, there was a moment, just a moment, where he hesitated, his gaze lingering on mine. I thought for a second that he might say something, but didn't, and as I stepped inside, my heart was pounding so loudly that I barely noticed the way my hands trembled as I locked the door behind me. The rain started mid-morning, a soft drizzle that quickly grew into a steady downpour. I was in the living room, tugging at the edge of the couch, and a few attempts to shift it closer to the wall. It had been bothering me for weeks. A slight angle that made the whole room feel off balance. Need some help? Ryan's voice startled me, and I turned to see him standing in the doorway, his hair damp from the rain. He held a toolbox in one hand and a reusable shopping bag in the other. I didn't realize you were coming over, I said, wiping my hands on my jeans. Shrugged, setting the bag down on the counter. Figured I'd check on you, pick it up a few things on the way, milk, eggs, the usual. I smiled faintly. You didn't have to do that. I wanted to before I could. He stepped into the room, his gaze falling on the couch. This giving you trouble? It's nothing, I said quickly. I was just trying to move it a little. Ryan raised an eyebrow, a teasing grin tugging at the corners of his mouth. By yourself, Yakno. I'm right here, right? I didn't want to bother you, I muttered, feeling a flush creep up my neck. You never bother me, hesitated, his tone softening. The words hung in the air for a moment before he moved past me, crouching beside the couch to examine its base. All right, he said, straightening up on three. I hesitated but nodded, moving to the opposite side. 12-3 together. We lifted the couch, shifting easily under our combined strength, but as we set it down, Ryan's shine brushed against mine, the conic sending a spark of something sharp and electric through me. I pulled back quickly, my pulse racing. Thanks, I said, my voice a little too bright. Ryan studied for a moment, his brow furrowing. You okay? Fine, I said quickly, avoiding his gaze. Just tired. I guess he didn't press issue, but I could feel his eyes on me as I moved to the kitchen, pretending to busy myself with the groceries he'd brought the rest of the afternoon. Pasadena, a strange unspoken tension. Ryan helped me rearrange the living room, offering his usual mix of practical advice and teasing commentary, but there was something different about the way he looked at me, something I couldn't quite name. By the time the rain eased into a light drizzle, my nerves were afraid, and I was grateful when Heffinally announced he was heading home. But as I watched him leave, his shoulders scrunched slightly against the rain. I felt a pang of something that wasn't quite relief that evening. I found him sitting on the porch when I went to lock up fourth night. He was leaning against therling a half-empty bottle of beer in his hand, his face illuminated by the soft glow of the porch light. "Did you forget something?" I asked, stepping outside. He shook his head. "Just didn't feel like going home yet." His voice wasky, almost somber, and I hesitate for sitting down on the bench beside him. The air was cool and damp, the smell of rain lingering in the breeze. "You okay?" I asked after a moment. Ryan glanced at me, a small smile tugging at his lipsy. "Should be asking you that." I frowned. "Why? Because you've been tense all day." I said simply. "Did I do something to upset you?" "No," I said. Quickly, too quickly. "Of course not." He tilted his head, his gaze steady and searching. "Then what is it?" He hesitated, my hands twisting in my lap. "I didn't know," I admitted finally. "I guessing not used to having someone around. It's been a long time since." I trailed off, unsure of how to finish the sentence. Syrian didn't press me. Instead, he took a long sip of his beer, his gaze drifting toward the yard. "You know," he said, after a moment, "I used to think my dad had it all figured out. The house, the job you." I glanced at him, startled by thoroughness in his tone, but he didn't. Ryan continued, his voice quiet but firm. "Hadn't appreciate what he had, and I hated him for that. I hated the way he treated you, like you were just another piece of furniture in his perfect little life." His words took the breath from my lungs. I turned to him, my throat aching. "Ryan, I'm not saying this to upset you," he said quickly. I've always admired you, Alon, the way you handled everything, the way you held yourself together, even when he didn't deserve it." I felt tears prick the corners of my eyes, but I blinked them away. "That's kind of you to say." I whispered. "It's not kindness," he said, his gaze locking onto mine. "It's the truth." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Only sound was the faint rustle of leaves in the wind, the occasional drip of water from the porch roof. Then Ryan reached for my hand, his fingers brushing against mine. The touch was light, hesitant, but it sent a wave of warmth around me that I couldn't ignore. "Lillian," he began, his voice soft, "I don't want to make you uncomfortable, but I care about you more than I probably should." My heart thundered in my chest and I struggled to find my voice. "Ryan, this is," "I know," he said, cutting me off gently. "I know it's complicated, but I need you to know how I feel. I need you to know that you're not alone." And Thish's words were both a comfort and a burden, and I felt a tear slip down my cheek before I could stop it. "I don't know what to say," I admitted, my voice trembling. "You don't have to say anything," Grian said, his thumb brushing against the back of my hand. "I just needed to tell you." We sat there for what felt like an eternity, the weight of his confession settling over us like a blanket I knew I should pull away, draw a line before it was too late, but I didn't. Instead, it stayed, my hand still resting in his warmth of his touch, chasing away feckled emptiness I'd carried for so long. Storm rolled in late the next evening. Thunder rumbled low in the distance, growing louder as the night stretched on. By the time the power flickered out, the house was bathed in near total darkness save for the faint glow of the streetlights filtering through the windows. I was lighting candles in the living room when I heard the knock at the door. My heart leapt unexpected. If I already knew who it was. Ryan stood on the porch, rain dripping from the edge of his hood and pooling at his feet. "POW out my place," he said with asthma shrug. "Thought I'd check on you." I stepped aside to let him in, his presence immediately filling the quiet cavernous space. "You didn't have to come all the way over here," I said, though my voice lacked conviction. Ryan pulled back his hood, shaking rain from his hair. "I didn't want you to be alone." His words sent a warmth through method I tried to ignore. "Well, your hair now," I said, turning toward the kitchen. "Let me grab you a towel." When I came back, was in the living room, crouched by the fireplace. The soft glow of the candles caught on the planes of his face as he worked to coax a flame to life. "Power outage or not, this house gets cold at night," he said, glancing over his shoulder at me. I nodded, handing him that. "Well, thank you." He stood, drying his hiring shoulders before tossing the towel onto the back of a chair. "There," he said as the fire crackled to life. "That's better." The room grew warmer, both from the fire and his presence. We sat on opposite ends of the couch, the silence between use broken only by the occasional pop of the fire and the distant rumble of thunder. "You've been quiet today," Ryan said after a while, his voice soft. I glanced at him, unsure of how to respond, just thinking about what. I hesitated, my fingers fidgeting with the edge of the blanket draped over my lap. "About us," I admitted. Finally, Ryan didn't look away. "What about us?" That this eye gesture heavily between us might be a mistake. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Do you really believe that?" I opened my mouth to reply, but no words came because the truth was I didn't know. Ryan reached for my hand, his touch warm and steady. "Lillian, I know this isn't simple, Jet, but nothing about the way I feel for you feels wrong. If anything, it's the most honest thing I've ever felt." His words cracked something open inside me. Damn, I've been holding back for far too long. I felt tears sting my ears, but I blinked them away, my voice trembling. As I spoke, I'm scared, I admitted, so am. I said, his thumb brushing against the back of my hand, but we don't have to figure it all out night, we just have to be honest with each other. The firelight danced in high sighs, and I felt the pull between us growing stronger, impossible to ignore Ian. I whispered, but before I could say anything more, he leaned and his lips brushed against mine, tentative at first, as though giving me a chance to pull away, but I didn't. Instead, I leaned and told him, the kiss deepening as the tension that had been building between us finally broke. I wasn't sure how we ended up in my bedroom. One moment we were on the couch and the next we were climbing stairs, his hand warm and steady on the small of my back. The rain outside had picked up again, the steady rhythm of it against the windows, blending with the sound of my heartbeat. Ryan hesitated at the doorway, his gaze searching mine. Are you sure? He asked, his voice low, almost reverent. Yes. I whispered the word, leaving my lips before I could guess it. The room was dim lit only by the flickering glow of the candles. Webra upstairs, the shadows danced across the walls as Ryan closed the door, pinned him, his steps careful as heck rest the room, to stand in front of me for a moment. We just looked at each other, the weight of everything unsaid filling the space between us. Then he reached for me, his hand settling on my waist as he pulled me closer. His kiss was slow, deliberate, as though he was memorizing every moment. His hands moved to cradle my face, his thumbs brushing against my cheeks, and I felt myself melting into him. He was petite and attentive, his movements guided by care rather than urgency. He traced the curve of my shoulders, the line of my spine, his touch sending shivers through me. That had nothing to do with the cool air in the room. When we finally came together there, it was like the world outside ceased to exist. The rain, the storm, the uncertainty all faded into the background, leaving only the two of us. It wasn't just physical, it was something deeper, something I hadn't felt in years. As the night stretched on, I felt myself let go of the doubts and fears that had kept me locked away for so long. With Ryan, I didn't feel like someone who had been left behind. I felt seen, wanted, and alive. When it was over, we lay tangled together in the soft glow of the candles, the sound of the rain now a soothing rhythm. Ryan's arm was draped over my waist, his breath warm against my shoulder. I don't regret this, he murmured, his voice soft but firm. I turned to look at him, my fingers brushing against his jaw. Neither do I, and for the first time in years, I felt at peace. I know, he said, stepping closer, but it doesn't have to be complicated either. We don't have to figure everything out right now. We can take it one step at a time. His words were gentle, reassuring, but they didn't erase the uncertainty twisting in my chest. What happens now? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Ryan reached for my hand, his fingers brushing against mine. That's up to you, he said simply. I looked down at our hands, the warmth of his touch grounding me. I didn't have all the answers, and I wasn't sure I ever would, but for the first time in years, I felt like I didn't have to have it all figured out. As we stood there, the sunlight painting the room in soft gold, I allowed myself a small tentative smile. The day stretched ahead of us, uncertain and full a possibility, and for now that was enough. The first light of dawn crept through the curtains, casting a soft glow over the bedroom. I woke before Ryan, the sound of his steady breathing filling the quiet space. His arm was still draped over my waist, cushioned resting lightly on my hip. For a moment I lay there, unmoving, my mind racing as I stared at the ceiling. The events of the night before felt surreal, like a dream I wasn't ready to wake from, but the warmth of his body beside me, the way his fingers twitched slightly in his sleep, it was real. I crossed a line I never thought I would. The guilt waits there, hovering at the edges of my mind, whispering all the reasons why this hadn't have happened. But beneath the guilt was something else, something stronger, a quiet, insistent joy. For so long I'd felt invisible, like a shadow moving through a house filled with the ghosts. Last night Ryan had reminded me how it felt like to be seen, to be wanted, and as much as I tried to tell myself it was wrong, I couldn't bring myself to regret it. Carefully I slipped out from under his arm, wrapping my robe around me. As I crossed to the window, the rain had stopped, leaving the yard glistening in the morning light. The world outside looked the same, but everything inside me felt different. Bent me, I heard the rustle of sheets, followed by the soft sound of Ryan's voice. Good morning. I turned to see him sitting out, his hair tzz, a sleepy smile tugging at his lips. Good morning, I replied, my voice quieter than I intended. Are you okay? He asked, his tone laced with concern. I hesitated before no, dingy, think so. We moved to the kitchen, where the sunlight streamed through the windows, casting golden pools of light across the floor. I brewed a pot of coffee while Ryan leaned against the counter, watching me in that quiet, steady way of his. The silence between us wasn't awkward, but it was heavy, filled with theory of unspoken questions. Finalarian Broke it, Lillian. I meant what I said last night. I don't regret this, not any of it. I turned to face him. My hands wrapped around my coffee mug. It's not that simple, Ryan, I said softly, you know it.